Welcome to Wear Your Cape to Work, a podcast hosted by Project Insight. We believe that project and program managers are the real superheroes of every organization. We want you to hear their stories so you can be inspired to wear your own cape to work. My guest on today's podcast is Katharine Manchanda. She's been a director of technological delivery and she's a program management professional, but I'm super excited to have her on the show today because she's a strategy and execution leader. She's worked in IT, banking, retail, and a wide variety of other industry sectors. And I think you're going to love to hear from her because she's as passionate about the people bringing projects to delivery as she is about executing business strategy. It's exciting to see those two concepts merge, and I'm so glad that we can have her on today's show. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Katharine. We're very glad and honored to have you as part of the Wear Your Cape to Work podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you on the show. If you can share a little bit for us, our audience, about your background and how you got into project and program management, that would be great.
Keeping it very high level, I've been in this line of work for almost 15 years. And it's evolved a lot, I feel, especially it's accelerating the evolution more recently. But I've worked across a number of industries, spending a lot of my time in finance with TD Bank, but I've moved around as well with, tech shops like Cisco, worked a little bit in automotive financing, retail, and most recently was, the winery industry. And I think a huge chunk of my career was focused in the banking area. And a part of that was the early days of moving into AI. So predating AI was machine learning and advanced analytics. And I was actually very fortunate to be in the first wave of that, as our TD Bank in Canada was, I think, trying to really be the early adopters in this sector. So I think that was a very pivotal moment because, as you know, in the last couple of years, that's really exploded. So that's a quick highlight of what industries I've worked on. But in terms of the types of projects and programs I've led, it's been everything from upgrading legacy systems into customer-facing loyalty programs. I've actually done two of those. As I mentioned, the enterprise data and analytics portfolio. So there was a lot of machine learning and advanced analytics projects. And within that too, I've focused a lot of my time in growing PMOs, working on updating governance and coaching and mentoring PMs.
That's amazing. I was particularly, interested in the loyalty program. It jumped out at me when you were talking about it now, but also when I looked at your LinkedIn profile and come to find that the company that you were working for at the time is one of two major grocery retailers. Is that how you would refer to them in Canada?
Yeah.
What's the name of the one company?
Sobeys.
Right.
Sobeys was moving into a new relationship at the time with what we also have this program called Theme. At the time, it was Theme, and they were partnered with one of our largest banks, and they were very much focused in the entertainment area. And then they partnered with a bank. And more recently, that's when Sobeys entered the conversation. They became one-third owners of the brand, and they wanted to integrate that with with all of their offerings, essentially, because Sobeys has not only the brick and mortar stores under a slew of different banners across the provinces, but they also have the delivery program, side of the business called Wola. So they were working on putting that together at the time and launching a brand new loyalty program.
Wow, that's amazing. And that was your most recent role up to your current role?
Oh, no. That was my most recent loyalty program, but my most recent role has been working with Arterra Wines, which was an interesting, completely new landscape for me, because not only is it a new industry that I was working in, but they've also been going through a huge number of changes. First of all, in general, the spirits industry, I guess, to kind of qualify that entirely, has been shifting in that newer generations are not so much interested in drinking alcohol. There's more
Right.
of an interest in different types of activities, hobbies, or
Huh.
vices, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Um, but also beyond that, a lot of people are opting for non-alcoholic beverages as well, and that has been a very fast-moving part of the sector. And beyond that, where I am in Ontario, there have been a lot of regulatory changes in terms of distribution, the laws around that, and really opening that up. So, in most states in the U.S., from what I understand, alcohol can be sold in any number of retailers, from convenience stores to big box stores. Up in Canada, it was very tightly controlled by a crown corporation. And when I say crown corporation, I mean to say that essentially government controlled. Um, and most, within the last couple of years, that's been opened up to convenience stores, even gas stations. A whole new,
Wow.
chunk of the market opened up. And with that, there was new distribution channels, new agreements to go
Wow.
through. Everything changed essentially almost overnight. So it was a very turbulent time.
Does that largely fall into the role of the project managers then to get together and help the executive team understand what would have to happen for those initiatives to pivot like that?
So I think I'll answer in a broader way, if you don't mind. I think it really depends on the appetite of the organization. And I've worked in every permutation of this where PMs just get told, this is the project, march, and deliver it. Or there are organizations, although fewer of them, that really bring the PMO to the table to discuss, what the implementation might look like, whether it makes sense for us. See, and leading back a little bit to where you and I connected, um, what I find is very often companies are trying to catch up to their competition. They're not necessarily looking at, what the industry trends are, or, what the outlook would be in the next 5 to 10 years. It's very short term and immediate. But then we get saddled with projects and programs which have 1 to 2 year horizon potentially. And by the time it gets delivered, of course, with all the delays that are natural and very frequently come into play, the delivery, what has been delivered, is very often no longer relevant, or it's already outdated. Which is,
Right.
part of the conversation of trying to revisit and recalibrate those goals. Are we still, on the correct roadmap? Do we need to alter our course in any way? And it's definitely cheaper and more sensible to see if we could do that during, especially those longer term initiatives, while delivery is still ongoing, before we've really gone too far, because at that point it will be a sunk cost.
Yeah, and that's the biggest, I guess, wary point for the organization is, we invested here and maybe this isn't the right direction. How do we recover some of that investment or all of it? Or how can we capitalize on what we've done and move it into another direction? All of those questions become quite large for an organization. Did you know when you entered into project and program management that there was that much strategic interruption possible as you first got into the IT space, I think?
I don't think I had quite that macro view when I started. I was very much focused on, what's the current goal, and how do we march and complete it. Very task focused. The strategic side of it, I think, came over time when I started realizing that, well, we delivered this, but it's already kind of yesterday's news, because it's no longer relevant, for example. Um, and 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 that's part of an interesting shift too, because when I first started doing project management, waterfall projects were still very, very common and prevalent.
Right.
Speaking about methodology, and then later on, agile became a lot more kind of, I don't even want to say fashionable. It became something that everybody really wanted to be a part of. Whether, again, it's not correct for everyone, whether or not it was right for the organization, but at least that iterative way of thinking, I think, started helping people be more reflective and strategic, because you would have those built-in pauses where you could do retrospectives and have a discussion about, what did we deliver and what's the next, what's the next step for the next couple of sprints. I think that's where a more strategic view actually became more natural and kind of more
Hmm.
part of the framework for a lot of organizations. Whereas with a waterfall project, you kind of buckle in your seatbelts and you're on the
That's
path for
true.
the you know, I don't know, a prolonged period of time. Very often those would be year-long engagements.
What are your decision makers asking about these projects, as strategies change? What are some of the most important metrics that the PMO can give to that leadership team to help them make the decisions that they have to kind of in flex or I guess when we're hot in pursuit of a project?
That's an interesting question. Most of the metrics that are reported on are very much related to how's the project tracking to its ultimate goal. Is it green? Is it yellow? Is it red? How much forecast have we burned through? Are we still? What's the variance? Are we still on track here? Resourcing questions, things like that. Um, but I find the most insight you can get into whether you're steering the ship in the right direction actually comes either from the very top down, so basically back to the executive sponsor who initially would have hopefully been the one at the table to launch this and had an idea, a vision in their mind as to where the market was going and what we're delivering, especially for those, customer facing projects and programs. And are we still headed? So that recalibration is extremely important. It can be done during
Mm-hmm.
executive steering committee meetings, even quarterly business reviews, things like that. But a lot of the time, we're very inwardly focused. Is the project still green? Is the discussion we're
Right.
usually having. Or from bottom up, essentially, from the delivery team, the actual technical experts typically working in IT projects, especially, where they're saying, okay, well, yeah, I see the business requirements, but this is kind of from 2 years ago. What our competitors are working on is XYZ. And what I find is that middle part doesn't translate well across the layers very frequently, just because of the conversations we're having. Like I said, very focused on specific metrics of the project delivery. Is it still successful? But we're not talking about is it still relevant?
Right. Successful or relevant. Oh, that's a really great concept. Is the delivery successful? Yes. Is it relevant to our strategy today? Maybe, maybe not. Yes, no. Um, and does that color, it may not color your, project success, but does it color the way the executives see the success of a project?
I would say so, and this might be a
Hmm.
little bit unpopular, but I think it needs to be
Right.
said that there's in a lot of organizations there's a bit of a tension between PMO and the executive layer
Hmm.
because and it depends entirely on how the project function is structured
Yep.
in the company. But very often, if it's kind of a center of excellence, or there are different ways of calling it, but essentially, if you have a PMO sit in a company, it's typically a cost center because
Hmm.
you're focused on delivering a project, and against the project, it's an expense. Whereas operations is BAU, business as usual. It's a baseline
Right.
cost. You're
Sure.
thinking about the PMO more so as an administrative cost that's an additional cost to delivery. And when you get something delivered, and I think I alluded to this earlier, where in a lot of companies you kind of get the project charter. This is the deadline. This is your budget. This is
Right.
your goal. Go on and deliver it by X date. Um, and then once the delivery happens, the PMO is measured on the kind of on the benefits, and that's a very interesting and tricky discussion in a lot of companies because the benefits will come out very much against the original design of the project. And if the PMO wasn't helpful in or at the table, let's say,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
in designing those
Right.
benefits, there'll be a disconnect. So I think
Hmm.
there's sometimes a tension between PMOs and executive leadership. And I'm hoping that over time we can close that with more open discussions about how to better integrate PMOs into the corporate function.
Yeah, from the beginning, I can hear that, from you and from our other guests, as we've talked across several industries, it's not necessarily part to one industry or another. This happens regardless of industry and regardless of company size, actually, revenue, all of those things. You can have different organizations who bring the PMO in, to those executive steering, discussions, or even pre-project, or, what's the whole goal of the organization as a whole. Or there are those who have those strategic initiatives maybe decided, maybe not even decided, right? And then invite the PMO to execute on them. And that's a very different way to work and can result in the same outcome if there's no bumps along the way, but that's very often not the case. Or if the project is short term, right? I think shorter term projects probably don't have that much risk of swaying from the original strategy.
Yeah, but those are very hard to deliver, especially
Yeah.
again, a lot of companies have very heavy governance. I'll give you an example. There's one infamous example from my experience where you would have a company with a 60-day lead time to speak to the executives for a steering committee, and 60 days in a project can be a lifetime. So much changes on a daily basis that it's really far too long in order to get access to your executive layer in order to make decisions. So you lose a lot of time, you lose a lot of flexibility and momentum. So I think that's another part of the conversation too.
Yeah, that is. And it really brings up another topic of how well connected can your leadership be to every little project happening, and how is your organization structured so that there is access to those executive decision makers in a timely way so that things can stay on task and on track for a timely delivery. That can be a risk in itself. If as an organization, it's very difficult to get to the leadership, or vice versa, if the leadership isn't able to make a decision when presented with these different scenarios, it makes that a challenge. Project Insight's interesting because we have a simulation tool called a what if simulation, and project manager or program manager can take a whole lot of different scenarios that they're able to bring to their executive decision maker for that moment. Like, what are my options? We've talked about at our company, but at other companies, that problem of an executive asking you, what is my option here? And a PM having to say, well, let me get back to you next week. That's just not an option for teams that have to keep on the move.
Yep, agreed. And occasionally you'll have one sponsor overseeing essentially almost all of the projects that are on the go. And they really can't be that invested in every single one of them, right?
Right.
So, and
Right.
that's where PMO design, I think, the way that it is set up and designed in a specific company matters so much. Because you can't avoid that ownership. It has to be there. But also, how do you make sure that you're not spread too thinly? Um, Part of the solution is potentially empowering your PMO to make some, more of those decisions. So there's less onus on the executive sponsor, or potentially spreading that out a little bit across different executive sponsors so that
Mm,
they can really take ownership of their respective projects and be involved.
right.
Because um, having that having that gap, it can really hurt a project.
What high level things do they have to see at a very bare minimum to be able to, be connected as a sponsor to a certain project?
Well, I think there should be less conversation about the current status and more conversation about risks and issues. A lot of the time, those are cushioned and softened a little bit, just to make sure that certain people don't get upset too much or we don't panic. I think part of that is organizational culture, and I've seen by far the most successful companies are when it comes to delivery are those that are very open and upfront. The ones that say, I'd rather see that train coming from 100 miles away, that I have enough time to react to it, rather than you guys, wait until the 11th hour to tell me what the problem is. And it's a lot harder to manage issues than it is to manage risk. So,
Right.
by the time that a risk becomes an issue, it's usually a very different conversation. So I think that is number one, is stop talking about, whether the project's in green, or how bad it is that it's been yellow 3 weeks running. Maybe that is the accurate reflection of the project. And let's instead of focusing on that, focus on what are the drivers of that. Um, that would be my number one suggestion, is focusing on the risks before they become issues.
Right. I like that. That's a really great poignant thing. Okay, everyone can hang up their podcast earphones. That's it. Take it away, right? Find your risks before they become issues. I love that. That's a great takeaway for an executive. And I'm sure that they know that too. Like all of us know this inherently, right? Like I just need to know what's going to be a problem before it's a problem,
Yeah.
to distill it in a nutshell. Yeah. About the projects that you've been a part of, you mentioned before some of the great ones that you have in your mind. Are there certain projects that stand out to you that really showcase some of this strength that you have in helping with the strategic moves of an organization?
I think so. In some roles, I've been more so on the front lines of delivery. In some roles, I've been more so
Mm-hmm.
focused on PMO work, where I've been able to lend a little bit more weight and help in structuring some of those strategic conversations and helping shape that, is when I was more so in the of portfolio or program role, as opposed to the front lines. Unfortunately, when you're in the front lines, you can't do both very effectively most of the time. When I was doing frontline delivery, and I have fantastic projects that stand out in my mind, but for those ones, it was more so on the ground issues and obstacles that I was focused on making sure that we get to the deadline. So to answer your question, yes, but in very different, I think, execution.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought it up that way. It's probably interesting, excuse me, for organizational leaders who are listening. You have frontline PMs and you have people who are, in the back, who are doing some of the more strategic work. And is your organization divided well to know who should be playing forward and who should be playing goalie? I don't know if you put it into soccer terms, but that's an interesting way to look at it. This different, positions on the field for how to get things accomplished.
You actually really like that analogy that you mentioned, because there needs to be a coach that can actually see the strengths of each of the players and be able to allocate them correctly, and also to modify that or update that as the game goes on, right? Depending on what the team needs.
Yeah, now we're into capacity. Even if someone has to take, a couple weeks vacation, that changes the way a certain project is able to be accomplished. Or if, you need someone on another project and they're, we're competing teams for the same person and their strengths, that can be a challenge as well. If you had a coach who was coaching you on your project work, if they were looking at Katharine, what would they say was Katharine's strength, her superpower, her position that they knew they could count on you for in all of the work that you've been doing?
Um, Honestly, I think it's the people side of things. Delivering the project, there's definitely a skill set to it, and it's extremely important. Um, but you kind of get into a very rhythmic um, way of doing things, especially
Yes.
every every delivery professional will come into a project with their own ways and habits of doing things. But when it comes to people, they're always different. There's different challenges going on. You were just mentioning
Mm-hmm.
kind of skill set, but it's beyond that too. Sometimes you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about which PM to allocate to which project, not just based on their talents and skills, but also based on where they might need to grow a little bit, right? To make sure you have a more
Interesting.
well
Mm-hmm.
team. So there's a lot of push and pull between so many different variables. So I think where I enjoy really, which part of my job that I enjoy the most is really managing the people and
Mm-hmm.
finding ways to get the best out of them.
That's nice. That's exciting. I love that. Finding ways to get the best out of them. We've had a few guests on the podcast who are in similar positions, who have that same kind of strength. I'm thinking of one, Linda Goodrich, who's a customer of ours with a company called Curus, and she took a lot of joy out of finding that perfect spot for that person, for growth and, like you said, for growth and for skill use. It was fun to hear her episode as well. I'm glad to hear that you've enjoyed the people part of the PMO. Is there any advice you would say? We have many listeners who are just setting up a PMO and they haven't even gotten to this point where they are looking at frontline players and backline players and, skill sets, and they're not looking at necessarily strategic moves. They're just trying to get the projects accomplished in a routine sort of way. What would your advice be to those organizations that are just setting up a PMO? They want to have this clarity. They want to have a nice symphony of work going on with all of the musicians playing in the right chairs. What would you say?
My mind jumps to two things. So first of all, PMO is going to be a custom or a bespoke, if you will, a solution for your company. It's not going to necessarily look like company A or B or C. You're going to have your own structure, but it's going to be a custom solution based on your needs, based on your size, the industry you're in, whatever your challenges are, where your constraints are. If it's in the resources part of that challenge, potentially sometimes companies outsource most of their delivery work, right? So it depends on a lot of these unique components of what makes up the delivery experience in your company. And secondly, I think focus on the types of projects that you're working on. If they're if they're smaller in scale, potentially you might need to have spread multiple projects across one delivery professional. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Working on two projects at 50-50 on paper is usually, let's call it 120 capacity, because switching between projects there's a lot of work in switching between them. So once you start piling on projects, just start to understand that capacity doesn't look in practice like it does on paper.
Yeah. So it is different. And it takes a person like yourself with some strengths in managing the capacity of people and finding, where they can be pushed just a little bit and where they need to be protected, a little bit, and to speak back to, what the burden on the whole company, is, can this be accomplished? Can't it be accomplished? If we rearrange things, how can this be done differently? So finding some of those tools that can help you look at the data around, how long this takes, someone to accomplish, how much bandwidth do they need? How many competing priorities are there? Do we have to reallocate, workloads or rebalance them, across these teams so that we don't burn out our whole team, to get to the end of this delivery? You don't want everyone to up and leave, in the middle of it or, just when it's over. So I appreciate that you have brought these skills both for people and for strategy, to share with us on the podcast, Katharine. I can tell that, you're doing the people work, but because of the long time that you've been in this particular role, you're an asset to people in the business, in the executive side who need to have that strategic outlook. In the end, that is the goal, right? That's how a company grows and moves forward, is we care about our people. We're amazed at their skills and the strengths that they bring, but everybody's got to do their work to move, this initiative forward. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. We're so glad that you could be with us, Katharine.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure and it was a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining us today on the Wear Your Cape to Work podcast, hosted by Project Insight. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, follow, or leave us a comment. If you subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or other favorite podcast channels, you'll receive notifications of all of our new episodes. We'd also love it if you would share Wear Your Cape to Work with your network of PMPs or anyone else who might enjoy the show. Project Insight is an online project and portfolio management software that helps companies connect project data from across all of their teams and software tools so that they can make confident decisions about their business. Our website is projectinsight.com, and there you can find many resources for project professionals, including free PDU webinars, as well as a place to register for a demonstration or a consultation with one of our success teams. Thank you once again for joining today's conversation, and most importantly, thanks for wearing your cape to work.